What would you do if the calm waves turned deadly in an instant? How do you fight off a predator when the odds are stacked against you? A lifeguard's routine shift on a crowded Hawaiian beach becomes a nightmare as a sudden storm brings a predator from the depths. Blood fills the water as a powerful reef shark drags him under. Just one of 6 harrowing shark encounters that will leave you breathless. 5 fishermen prepared for a day at sea in a small fishing village called Bodega Bay, off the coast of Northern California. It was September 14, 2011, a date etched in their memories for years. The town was known for its fishing industry, and the waters teemed with life. Everything from salmon to tuna, and at times larger creatures like dolphins or whales that strayed close to shore. But there were also great white sharks, apex predators that roamed the deeper waters beyond the bay. The men knew of them, heard stories, and sometimes saw them in the distance. But these sharks generally kept to themselves, rarely venturing too close. That morning, the fishermen, Ezekiel Rowan, Damon Hale, Samuel Colburn, Jareth Finn, and Wyatt Lorne, readied their vessel, the Coral Arrow. The captain, Ezekiel, was a seasoned fisherman. His gray hair and weathered skin were a testament to decades spent on the water. Damon and Samuel, cousins, had been working on boats since their teens, while Jareth and Wyatt were newer to the crew but equally determined to prove their worth. By 5 a.m. they had set sail, moving steadily into the deeper waters where the larger fish usually gathered. It was a routine trip much like any other, and they spent the early hours pulling in small catches of tuna and mackerel. The morning passed without incident. The men focused on their tasks, exchanging the occasional word as they worked. Around midday, as they prepared to move to a new spot, something tugged at one of the larger nets. The pull was intense, stronger than they had felt in years. With his experience, Ezekiel immediately suspected something large, possibly a whale calf that had accidentally swum into their nets. Damon and Samuel rushed to secure the lines, bracing themselves as the boat rocked slightly under the weight of the catch. For a brief moment, they considered the idea of a stranded whale calf. It wouldn't be the first time a whale had become entangled in fishing gear, and the fishermen had protocols for releasing such creatures. However, as the creature began to surface, it became clear that they were dealing with something else entirely. The body was long and sleek, with a grayish hue, not the dark tones of a whale. And then, the shape of a dorsal fin cut through the water. Tall, sharp, unmistakable. They had caught a juvenile shark, not a whale, but it was still an imposing sight, stretching over 10 feet long. The men stood frozen for a moment, staring in shock. Great whites were known to roam these waters, but they rarely came so close to fishing boats, let alone get caught in a net. The shark thrashed wildly, its powerful body twisting and jerking as it fought to free itself from the ropes binding it to the boat. Chaos erupted as the shark's movements rocked the vessel. The boat tilted precariously, and the men struggled to maintain control. Wyatt, positioned near the side of the ship, slipped as the shark's body slammed into the hull, throwing him against the rail. His arm hit the edge of the boat with a sickening crack, and he let out a sharp cry of pain. Blood dripped from a cut on his hand, adding to the frenzy of the moment. Ezekiel quickly barked orders to the crew, directing them to stabilize the situation. They couldn't risk the shark damaging the boat or pulling someone overboard. Damon grabbed a knife, ready to cut the lines, while Jareth and Samuel held fast to the ropes, trying to keep the shark from jerking free in an uncontrolled burst. Despite their efforts, the shark continued to thrash, its massive tail slamming into the side of the boat. The force of each blow reverberated through the wooden frame, and the crew realized that they were in a far more dangerous situation than they had initially thought. They needed to act fast to protect themselves and the shark, which grew more agitated by the second. With Wyatt injured and unable to assist, Ezekiel and the others moved swiftly, cutting the secondary lines while ensuring the main one kept the shark secured but not tight enough to cause more harm. Each movement required precision. One mistake could lead to the shark dragging the boat into deeper waters, or flipping it over entirely. As they worked, the weight of the situation began to sink in. Great whites were vital to the marine ecosystem, and the fishermen understood the need to release it unharmed, but their safety was paramount. They had heard stories of boats capsizing or fishermen being pulled into the water by large sharks. This was about letting the creature go and surviving the next few minutes. Eventually, Damon cut the final rope that had entangled the shark. Sensing its release, the beast gave one last violent thrash before disappearing into the depths. The boat rocked as it swam away, but the immediate danger had passed. Wyatt's injury was serious enough that they had to turn back. As Ezekiel steered the boat toward shore, the men sat silently, their bodies tense, the adrenaline still coursing through them. Wyatt cradled his injured arm, the blood now clotting, but the pain still evident on his face. Jareth, the youngest of the group, couldn't shake the image of the shark's powerful jaws and the feeling of helplessness as the massive predator struggled against them. When they returned to Bodega Bay, Wyatt was taken to the local clinic, where doctors treated his broken arm and the gash on his hand. The crew gathered later that evening at Ezekiel's home, exhausted from the ordeal. The conversation quickly turned to the encounter, and they discussed the importance of proper identification when dealing with large marine creatures. What had first appeared to be a whale calf was, in fact, one of the ocean's most feared predators. The incident sparked discussions within the fishing community about handling encounters with large sharks and the need for better protocols. The men were shaken by how easily the day could have ended in disaster, but they also felt a new respect for the creatures they shared the waters with. It wasn't just about the catch anymore. It was about understanding the ocean's balance and the risks that came with it. From that day forward, the fishermen of Bodega Bay approached their work with a little more caution, knowing that the sea held secrets far greater than they could ever anticipate. On the evening of August 9, 2009, a marine biologist, Dr. Laura Evans, arrived at a secluded beach near Jupiter Inlet, Florida. This stretch of coastline was known for its shark activity, particularly at night when feeding was more intense. Laura had been researching nocturnal shark behavior for months to gather data on bull sharks and frequent visitors. Bull sharks were known for their aggression and ability to thrive in salt and fresh water, often venturing close to shore in search of prey. That night, Laura prepared for another session of nighttime observations. The ocean was her second home, a place she had grown to respect over the years of her career. Each night was routine for her, setting up the underwater cameras, attaching sensors to track movements, and using bait to attract sharks for study. She was alone, as she preferred it during these expeditions. The calm quiet of the dark ocean allowed her to focus, and the lack of human disturbance made it easier to observe the natural behavior of the sharks. The day had been long, filled with preparations and equipment testing. Laura had spent the afternoon reviewing her findings from the previous night, adjusting her plan for the current study and setting up safety protocols. She knew the risks of her work, especially with bull sharks. These sharks were known for their unpredictable and aggressive nature, particularly in murky waters. But Laura was confident in her experience. Years of working with marine life had taught her how to stay safe and avoid unnecessary danger. By nightfall, Laura was already waist-deep in the water, securing one of her tracking devices near a shallow sandbar. The moon cast a faint light over the surface. The only sounds were the gentle water laps against her body. She moved methodically, making sure everything was in place. The water was calm, but she knew from experience that it could quickly turn dangerous if the sharks became agitated or if they sensed prey nearby. It didn't take long for movement to stir beneath the surface. Laura noticed small ripples in the water, signaling the presence of sharks. She watched closely as her equipment began registering the first signs of activity. It was typical for the sharks to circle the bait for a while before moving in, and Laura patiently waited, taking notes and adjusting her camera angles. But something felt different this time, an unusual stillness between the brief movement moments. Suddenly, a powerful force struck from below. Laura was thrown off balance as the water exploded around her. She felt the unmistakable impact of something large, and before she could react, a sharp pain shot through her leg. Instinctively, she knew what had happened. A bull shark had attacked. It wasn't her first time encountering sharks this close. But this was different. The shark had latched onto her leg, and its grip was strong. Adrenaline surged through her as she kicked and thrashed, trying to free herself. The pain was overwhelming, but survival instincts kicked in. She tried to push the shark off, feeling its rough skin scrape against her hands as she struggled. The water around her was now tinged with blood, making the situation even more dangerous. Bull sharks were notorious for becoming more aggressive in the presence of blood, and she knew that more sharks could be drawn to the scene at any moment. Despite the pain and panic, Laura freed her leg from the shark's jaws. She scrambled to reach the shore, every movement agonizing as the injury slowed her down. The water seemed to drag at her, pulling her back as she tried to escape. She could still feel the shark circling nearby, its predatory instincts heightened by the commotion. Each second felt like an eternity as she fought to avoid the threat. Her leg was badly injured, and every step toward the beach sent waves of pain through her body. She had to think quickly. Her equipment was still in the water, and no one was around to help. She fumbled for the small emergency beacon attached to her belt, her fingers shaking as she activated it. The beacon would send a distress signal to the research station a few miles away, but it would take time for anyone to arrive. In the meantime, Laura knew she had to leave the water completely. She crawled onto the sand, her body shaking from the effort and the shock of the attack. Her leg throbbed, blood seeping into the sand as she collapsed onto the shore. The beach was quiet again, as if nothing had happened, but the danger was still real. She kept her eyes on the water, half expecting the shark to follow her onto the beach. Hours passed before the rescue team arrived. Laura's distress signal had reached the research station, and a team had been dispatched to the beach. They found her on the sand, weak but conscious, her leg wrapped in a makeshift tourniquet. The team rushed her to the nearest hospital where doctors treated the deep lacerations on her leg. She had lost a significant amount of blood and would need surgery, but she was alive. The attack left Laura shaken, a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of her work. In the following days, the incident sparked conversations within the marine biology community about the dangers of researching shark-infested waters. Laura had always advocated for shark conservation, understanding the importance of these creatures in the ecosystem. But the attack underscored the need for better safety protocols for researchers, especially those working near dangerous predators like bull sharks. As Laura recovered, she remained committed to her research. The attack hadn't changed her passion for studying marine life, but had given her a new perspective on the risks involved. The experience led to the developing of new safety measures for nighttime research, including stricter protocols for working alone in shark habitats and improved emergency response procedures. In late April 2007, off the coast of a small town called Port Lincoln in southern Australia, a group of fishermen prepared for another long day on the water. The region had faced a season of overfishing, and the impacts were starting to show. Fish stocks were low, and the crew was feeling the pressure. The waters around Port Lincoln had always been rich with life, from schools of tuna to an occasional glimpse of tiger sharks known to frequent the area. But lately, things have changed. The lack of food in the ocean was affecting everything, including the sharks, which had begun behaving more aggressively. The crew consisted of 5 men. Eric Mallory, the captain, had fished these waters for over 2 decades. His experience gave him confidence, but even he had begun to notice how much harder it was to make a decent catch lately. Alongside him were his son, Jacob Mallory, and 3 longtime crew members, Thomas Keane, Marcus Lowry, and Elias Ford. All of them were seasoned fishermen, used to the rhythms of the sea. They'd seen good seasons and bad, but this one was shaping to be unlike any other. April 24, 2007 was another difficult day for them. By noon, they had barely pulled in half of what they'd hoped for, and the tension was palpable on the deck of the Stormbringer, their aging fishing vessel. The waters had grown eerily still in recent days, the once abundant schools of fish seemingly disappearing overnight. And while they hadn't discussed it openly, all the men had noticed an uptick in shark sightings, particularly tiger sharks. These predators, normally drawn to hunting far from the boat, were now coming uncomfortably close, perhaps due to the lack of prey. As the day wore on, the crew finally got a break. One of their nets suddenly went taut, heavier than anything they had pulled this season. The men sprang into action, assuming they had finally stumbled upon a decent catch of tuna, or perhaps some larger fish. But as the catch neared the surface, the water began to churn violently. At first, Eric thought it might be a few stray sharks mixed in with the haul. This wasn't uncommon. Sharks were sometimes caught in the nets drawn by the struggling fish. But when the first tiger shark broke the surface, its eyes wild and its jaws snapping, they realized this was something far more serious. Not one or two, but half a dozen tiger sharks were tangled in the nets, thrashing in a frenzy. The crew's behavior was different from anything they had seen before. The crew had always respected sharks, knowing they were part of the ocean's ecosystem, but they had never seen them act this aggressively. Normally, the sharks would struggle to free themselves from the net and eventually give up. But these sharks seemed desperate, hungry, their movements more violent than usual. Before the men could react, one of the larger sharks rammed into the side of the boat, causing it to rock violently. Jacob lost his footing, nearly falling overboard, but caught himself on the railing. Marcus was less lucky. As he moved to help secure the nets, another shark slammed into the vessel's side, sending him crashing into the deck, his arm twisted unnaturally beneath him. A sickening snap echoed across the boat as Marcus cried out in pain, his arm broken. Panic began to set in. The crew had dealt with shark encounters before, but this was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Eric shouted orders, trying to keep control of the situation, but the sharks were relentless. They circled the boat, occasionally ramming into it, their teeth gnashing as they tried to break free from the nets. Elias and Thomas scrambled to cut the ropes holding the nets, hoping that releasing the sharks would stop the attack. But as they worked, the water around the boat began to darken with blood. Some from the fish, some from Marcus's injury. The scent only made the sharks more aggressive. One of the sharks lunged out of the water, its teeth narrowly missing Thomas as he jerked backward in time. With the nets cut loose, the sharks finally began to free themselves, but the damage had been done. Marcus lay on the deck, clutching his arm in agony, while the others moved cautiously around the boat, trying to assess the situation. Jacob grabbed the emergency radio and called for help. They were miles from shore, and with the sharks still circling, there was no way they could safely continue fishing or make it back without assistance. Hours later, a rescue boat arrived, having been dispatched from the nearest coastal station. The sharks had dispersed when the rescuers reached them, but the crew was visibly shaken. Marcus was taken to the hospital for immediate treatment, and the others followed soon after, their minds still reeling from the attack. The fishing community in Port Lincoln had heard about shark encounters before, but nothing like this. Word spread quickly, and soon the story made headlines across Australia, raising concerns about the growing aggression of sharks in overfished waters. Marine conservationists were quick to point out the link between the incident and the broader issue of overfishing. The depletion of fish stocks had disrupted the balance of the ecosystem, forcing predators like tiger sharks to venture closer to fishing boats in search of food. The once abundant prey these sharks relied on had become scarce, driving them into desperate, aggressive behavior. The crew of the Stormbringer knew they had narrowly avoided a much worse fate. The event sparked a series of discussions between local fishermen and marine conservationists. Eric Mallory, shaken but determined, became an unexpected advocate for more sustainable fishing practices. He and his crew began working with conservationists to raise awareness about the dangers of overfishing and the need to protect marine ecosystems, not just for the sharks, but also for the future of their livelihoods. The attack was a wake-up call for the crew and the fishing community. It was clear that something needed to change. As the weeks passed, new regulations were introduced to reduce overfishing and give the ocean time to recover. The Stormbringer continued to sail, but now, with a deeper respect for the creatures they shared the water with. The men had survived a nightmare, and in the process they had become part of the larger fight to restore balance to the sea. On January 5, 1999, a busy summer day unfolded at Bondi Beach, a popular beach in New South Wales, Australia. Families gathered along the shore, children splashing in the shallows, while lifeguards kept watch from their posts. Even though it was near waters known for great white shark activity, Bondi Beach had always been a local favorite spot. The beachgoers knew the risks, but trusted the protective measures, shark nets, patrols, and lifeguard warnings. But on this day, something would go wrong. Among the families enjoying the beach were Megan Turner and her son, Luke Turner, a 16-year-old full of energy. They had arrived early, setting up their towels and picnic under the shade of an old tree that had become their go-to spot over the years. Megan was a single mother, and Luke was her only child. They had spent countless summers at Bondi Beach, swimming together in the clear waters, and today was no different. By mid-afternoon, the beach was packed. Megan watched as Luke played in the water, occasionally calling out to him to stay within sight. The waves were gentle, and Luke, a strong swimmer, ventured a bit farther out than usual. He loved the thrill of diving under the waves, pushing himself beyond the typical limits of the safe swimming zone. He wasn't the only one out there. Several other beachgoers floated nearby, enjoying the warm sea. It seemed like an ordinary day, but beneath the surface something was stirring. Great white sharks have always been part of the marine ecosystem in this region. Despite their reputation as fearsome predators, attacks were rare. However, Bondi Beach was near a shark hotspot, where deeper waters offered feeding grounds for these apex hunters. Occasionally, great whites were spotted from the shore, but typically far beyond the safety barriers. Though experts knew they were not foolproof, shark nets had been installed along the coastline. The balance between human activity and shark conservation was fragile, and the beachgoers and local authorities were constantly reminded of this delicate coexistence. As Luke swam farther out, a lifeguard noticed a slight ripple in the water beyond the nets, something unusual but not immediately alarming. The lifeguards had seen dolphins and harmless fish breach the surface in the past, so the ripple didn't raise much concern at first. Luke, oblivious to the signs of danger, continued playing, diving, and splashing. Without warning, everything changed. A great white shark surged toward Luke from beneath the surface, drawn by the splashing movements. The shark, likely mistaking him for prey, closed the distance with terrifying speed. Luke barely had time to react before the shark struck. In an instant, the water turned violent, churning with the force of the attack. Megan, sitting on the shore, sensed something was wrong. She couldn't see Luke anymore, just a mass of splashing water. Panic gripped her as she stood and moved closer to the water's edge, calling for him. Other swimmers, sensing the danger, rushed toward the shore. Within seconds, the beach was in chaos. The lifeguards sprang into action, blowing whistles and shouting for everyone to get out of the water. Luke's desperate struggle didn't last long. The shark's powerful jaws clamped down, dragging him under. Lifeguards raced into the water with jet skis, but it was too late when they reached the area. Luke had suffered fatal injuries in the attack, and the great white had disappeared as quickly as it had come. The rescue team pulled him from the water, but his injuries were severe. Despite their efforts, Luke was pronounced dead at the scene. The tragedy shook the entire beach. People who had moments earlier been enjoying the sun now stood in stunned silence. Megan collapsed in grief, unable to comprehend the sudden and brutal loss of her son. Emergency responders quickly arrived, clearing the beach and ushering people away from the shoreline. Once full of life and laughter, Bondi Beach was now eerily quiet. In the days following the attack, the local community was consumed by shock and anger. It was the first fatal shark attack at Bondi Beach in years, and the incident raised immediate concerns about safety measures at the beach. The New South Wales government ordered an investigation into the effectiveness of the shark nets and patrols. Marine experts were called to assess the local shark population to determine whether recent environmental changes or overfishing had contributed to the sharks' proximity to the beach. Some speculated that declining fish stocks had pushed the sharks closer to shore, increasing the likelihood of attacks. The attack sparked heated debates. Some community members demanded stronger shark control measures, calling for culling or more aggressive use of nets to protect swimmers. Others, including marine conservationists, urged caution, reminding the public that sharks were essential to the ocean's ecosystem. They argued that human activities, such as overfishing and habitat disruption, were partly to blame for the rise in shark encounters. Local authorities increased shark patrols along the coastline in response to the outcry. Drones were deployed to monitor the waters from above, providing early warnings of any large marine life approaching the shore. Lifeguards were equipped with better technology to detect sharks beyond the nets. Public education campaigns were also launched, teaching beachgoers about shark behavior, safety practices, and the importance of conservation. Signs were posted at Bondi Beach and other nearby beaches, warning swimmers about the risks and advising them to avoid certain areas during peak shark activity times. Bondi Beach reopened months later. The tragedy of Luke's death left a lasting impact on the community. On a cold October morning in 2001, the Ocean Ranger, a massive fishing vessel owned by Blue Wave Fisheries, set out from the harbor of St. John's, a small coastal town in Newfoundland, Canada. The ship, led by Captain George Larkins, had one purpose: to bring back a large haul of swordfish and tuna from the North Atlantic. The waters off this coast were known for their rich supply of high-demand fish species, which made them a prime target for the fishing industry. However, these waters were also home to numerous predators, including the notorious mako sharks, frequently appearing near the ship's nets. Captain Larkins had spent over 30 years in the fishing business. He knew the risks of these waters well, but was confident in his crew. Alongside him were men he trusted: Corey Bishop, the ship's chief engineer, a man skilled in managing the complexities of a large vessel, and Martin Doyle, the first mate who had been with Larkins for over a decade. The rest of the crew, about a dozen seasoned fishermen, had seen their share of challenges, but nothing like what they would encounter this time. The day started like any other. There was an air of familiarity as the crew loaded their nets and prepared their lines. The waters were calm, and the radio buzzed with reports from other fishing boats in the area. By midday, the Ocean Ranger had reached the deep waters of the Atlantic, and the crew began their work in earnest. The first few hours passed uneventfully, with the crew pulling their usual haul of swordfish and tuna. But strange movements started to disturb the water as the nets grew heavier. The first sign of trouble came when one of the crew members, Brendan Nash, noticed shadows beneath the surface, moving with an unnatural speed. At first, the men dismissed it as normal, schools of fish swimming nearby or perhaps dolphins. But within minutes, the cause of the disturbance became clear. A group of mako sharks, known for their speed and aggression, had zeroed in on the boat. Attracted by the smell of fish and the sight of the catch being hauled up, the sharks began to circle the Ocean Ranger, their sharp dorsal fins cutting through the water. The crew had dealt with sharks before, but something about this encounter felt different. The makos weren't just investigating the ship. They were acting aggressively, drawn by the scent of blood in the water from the fish being brought aboard. The men worked faster, trying to get the catch onto the deck and away from the sharks, but the sharks were relentless. Within moments, one of the sharks lunged at the side of the boat, crashing against the hull with surprising force. Several more followed, slamming into the nets, tearing at them with powerful jaws. The ship rocked from the impact, and the crew struggled to keep footing. One of the lines holding the nets snapped under the strain, and a massive wave of fish and pieces of torn net spilled back into the ocean. Captain Larkins ordered the crew to reel in what they could, but the sharks continued to attack, biting through the remaining nets and threatening to damage the boat. Panic set in as the sharks grew bolder. The crew had never seen makos act this way, so coordinated, so aggressive. It was clear that overfishing in the area had pushed the sharks to this level of desperation. With fewer fish in the open sea, the sharks had begun associating fishing vessels with easy food. Now the Ocean Ranger was in the middle of a feeding frenzy. As the attacks continued, Martin Doyle took control of the deck, guiding the men in securing what remained of the catch. Corey Bishop, down in the engine room, monitored the boat's systems, ensuring the hull wasn't compromised. Meanwhile, Captain Larkins made a decision. He ordered the crew to deploy the shark-repellent devices they kept on board, small electronic emitters designed to keep predators at bay. The devices emitted a frequency that typically deterred sharks, but there was no guarantee they would work in these waters. The crew hurried to set up the devices around the boat's perimeter. For a moment, the repellent was working. The sharks slowed their attacks, circling more cautiously, but the damage had already been done. The Ocean Ranger's nets were ruined, and they had lost a significant portion of their catch. To make matters worse, one of the crew members, Brendan, had been injured when a loose net hook struck his leg during the chaos. With the immediate threat of the sharks receding, Captain Larkins assessed the situation. Brendan needed medical attention, and the ship's equipment was severely damaged. They would have to return to shore much earlier than planned. The mood on the Ocean Ranger was tense as the crew began to clean up the mess, salvaging what they could. The encounter with the Mako sharks had left everyone shaken. This wasn't just a freak incident. It was a clear sign that something was wrong in these waters. Back in St. John's, word of the shark attacks spread quickly. The fishing industry in the region had long been at odds with marine conservationists, who had warned that overfishing would lead to increased shark encounters. A practical man, Captain Larkins had always been skeptical of these claims. But after seeing the aggressive behavior of the sharks firsthand, he knew that something had to change. In the following weeks, Blue Wave Fisheries held meetings with marine biologists and conservationists to discuss what had happened. It became clear that the declining fish populations were forcing predators like mako sharks closer to fishing vessels, making them a serious threat. The company began to explore more sustainable fishing techniques, including modifying their nets to minimize bycatch and deploying additional shark deterrents to prevent future attacks. The incident with the Ocean Ranger became a turning point for the company. Captain Larkins and his crew returned to the sea with a new approach. They adopted practices that reduced their impact on the marine ecosystem, understanding that the balance between fishing and ocean conservation was more delicate than they had realized. In early June 2003, Jake Thompson, a lifeguard at Hanauma Bay Beach, a popular spot on Oahu, Hawaii, prepared for another long day at work. Hanauma Bay was famous for its clear waters and vibrant marine life, attracting thousands yearly visitors. The beach, however, was also known for its proximity to reef shark habitats. While these sharks rarely bothered humans, their behavior could change dramatically when storms disturbed their usual feeding grounds. Jake had worked as a seasoned lifeguard at Hanauma Bay for nearly 8 years. His colleagues well respected him for his calm demeanor and quick decision-making during emergencies. His passion for the ocean and commitment to keeping swimmers safe drove him to take extra shifts, and that day was no different. June 14, 2003, started like any other day. The beach was packed with tourists, families, and surfers enjoying the warm Hawaiian waters. But by mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered, signaling an incoming storm. The storm hit faster and harder than expected. Winds howled, and the waves quickly grew rough, pulling swimmers out toward deeper waters. Jake and the other lifeguards sprang into action, blowing whistles and waving for everyone to get out of the water. Despite their efforts, a group of swimmers, tourists unfamiliar with the beach's strong currents, got caught in a dangerous rip current. Jake grabbed his rescue board without hesitation and plunged into the churning waves. The current was strong, but Jake's years of experience helped him navigate the rough surf. He reached the struggling swimmers, pulling 2 young children onto his board and guiding the adults toward safety. Exhausted but relieved, Jake and the swimmers made it back to shore, where other lifeguards helped them out of the water. Everyone was shaken, but no one was seriously hurt. The storm passed quickly, but the beach remained closed for the day due to hazardous conditions. As the evening fell, most of the staff left, but Jake, as usual, volunteered to stay late and monitor the beach. His sense of responsibility ran deep, and he often patrolled the shore long after the crowds had left, ensuring everything was safe. By nightfall, the beach was empty and the winds had calmed, but the water remained unsettled. Below the surface, the storm had disrupted the feeding patterns of the reef sharks that patrolled the seas around Hanauma Bay. These sharks were normally cautious and avoided human contact, but the sudden shift in the environment had made them restless and unpredictable. Jake stood on the shore, watching the waves as the last light of day disappeared. The quiet was peaceful, but something in the water caught his eye. A shadow moved beneath the surface, too fast to be a fish. He recognized it as the outline of a reef shark. Concerned but not alarmed, Jake knew these sharks occasionally ventured closer to shore after storms, looking for easy prey stirred up by the waves. Jake, ever cautious, waded into the shallow water to get a closer look, believing the shark would swim away once it sensed his presence. He had encountered reef sharks before, and they usually fled at the sight of a human, but this time was different. The shark, agitated by the storm and food scarcity, acted aggressively. In an instant, the shark lunged at Jake, its sharp teeth tearing into his leg. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Jake tried to pull away, but the shark was relentless, driven by hunger and instinct. His training kicked in and he struck at the shark's gills, desperately trying to free himself. The shark finally released him, but the damage had been done. Jake was bleeding heavily, and his strength was fading fast. Barely able to stand, Jake stumbled back toward the shore, leaving a trail of blood in the water. He reached the sand, but his injuries were severe. Alone on the deserted beach, Jake collapsed. Despite his efforts to slow the bleeding, he knew he was in grave danger. Hours passed before a beach patrol found him unconscious and barely clinging to life. Jake was rushed to the nearest hospital, but it was too late by the time he arrived. The blood loss was too great and his injuries were fatal. The news of his death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. Jake had been a beloved figure at Hanauma Bay, and his sudden loss left a deep void. The beach, once filled with laughter and crashing waves, now felt eerily quiet after the tragedy. In the aftermath of Jake's death, local authorities launched an investigation into the incident. It became clear that the storm had disrupted the reef shark's normal behavior, making them more aggressive and unpredictable. While shark attacks in Hawaii were rare, the incident highlighted the risks lifeguards and beachgoers faced in marine environments. Jake's death prompted immediate changes at Hanauma Bay Beach. The local government worked with marine biologists to develop better shark monitoring systems, using drones and underwater sensors to track shark activity near the shore. Lifeguards were given additional training on handling shark encounters, and public awareness campaigns were launched to educate beachgoers about the dangers of swimming after storms and how to avoid attracting sharks. The community mourned Jake's death, holding a memorial service on the beach where he had saved countless lives. His family, friends, and colleagues gathered to honor his bravery and dedication. Jake's passing symbolized the inherent risks faced by those who dedicate their lives to protecting others in the unpredictable waters of the ocean.